Hey everybody, I'm Rebecca. I've been dyeing my own yarn and fiber for about 18 years now. It's definitely an integral part of my creation process. I dye a lot of my yarn for tapestry weaving, but I also dye spinning fiber and various preparations for other fiber projects. I use Saberset or Lanaset acid wool dyes. These are dyes that are very color fast and light fast, and they're great for tapestry, but also for any other art project you want to use them for. They only work with protein fibers, which are things that come from animals, and they also work great on silk. Today I just want to take a quick look at what you really need to dye your own yarn. It can be very simple. These dyes are super safe to use with a few simple precautions. Let's look at what you might need for your dye setup. If all you're doing is small projects and you don't need large volumes of yarn, you can have a very simple setup. You will need some tools and equipment. I do actually recommend not dyeing in your kitchen if at all possible. I like to dye outside or in my garage with the garage doors open. So let's look at this setup. First thing you'll need is a heat source. This is a great option. It's just a simple electric hot plate. There are many of them out there and some are actually quite inexpensive. You need something where the temperature is adjustable and meaning that it can go quite low but also can keep the pot at a boil for 45 minutes. An electric hot plate is really great if you're hesitant to use a propane stove. The next thing you'll need is some kind of a pot. This is an 8-quart pot that would work really great for any small amount of yarn, up to about half a pound, I think. This is a stainless steel pot. You'll want it to be stainless steel. This came from the dollar store. I think I paid $8 for this. It was quite a few years ago, but I bet you could get a pot like this for less than $15 new. Or check out restaurant supply stores or garage sales or any other place to get a stainless steel pot. Do not use something from your kitchen that you are going to use for food ever again. Once you dye in it, it is for dyeing. You'll need some dyes. So the dyes I use are Saberset or Lanaset acid wool dyes, and they come in little containers like this. Pro Chemical and Dye also sells a nice little kit that has all the dyes you need, as well as the leveling compounds. So you'll need some salts, which are what makes the colors even. This is Glauber salt, or you can use pickling salt from the grocery store. It's quite cheap. The salt is, whatever salt you use is quite inexpensive. Sodium acetate is another leveler that I use, and you will need acid. I use citric acid. You can also get this at the grocery store, and you could also use vinegar. And then this little kit has tiny little jars of primary colors, and it's a good place to start if you're not sure about this whole dyeing process and you want to try it out. This little kit is like $12, so a really great place to start with. These are only 10 grams of dye, but that's enough to get you going. You will need a scale to measure your dye powders with. So we'll be measuring the powder on the scale and putting it into a solution. We'll use stock solutions, which are easier to measure and much safer. So you take the powder, you put it in solution, you need a container to put the solution in. After that, the dyes are quite safe to use because you can't breathe them in, and we'll measure from the stock solution. You'll probably want a calculator to figure out the very simple math. If you're good with math in your head, you don't even need the calculator, but I use it all the time. You will need some little bits of plastic or other containers. I use these little party cups to measure the dye out in. Those are really cheap, and I use them over and over and over. I've probably had these for 5 years or more. Couple little containers. This could be like a used yogurt container or something, just to hold water and rinse things. And then syringes. These are super inexpensive from the dye supplier. They're to measure the stock solution out so that you can get the color that you want. In this dye process, I am working from math and measurements so that I can replicate the colors and that I know what I'm going to get. It's not just hit or miss, trial and error. It's a very rewarding way to dye. You'll need a couple other things. Some kind of graduated cylinder. You could actually use just a kitchen measuring device. This is a little more accurate and not too expensive. some gloves. You'll have hot yarn and hot pots, and you want to protect your hands. I also use those little exam gloves in addition to this when I'm measuring dye, so my skin doesn't absorb the dye. Some kind of thermometer. This is a glass one from the dye supplier, but you could just get an inexpensive candy thermometer from the grocery store. That works just fine. You just need to know approximately what temperature your pots are as they're going. I use a little timer as I do my dyeing to make sure that I'm keeping track of what's happening in the pots. You'll need some kind of lung protection. So if you're not doing a lot of dyeing, an N95 mask, which we all have now, is great. That should work just fine. Or if you're going to do a lot of dyeing, I recommend getting a respirator. The dye company also sells these that are rated for dyeing. This is to keep the dye powder out of your lungs. You'll need some various things like little shop towels, or you can use paper towel, and probably a bucket of some kind. This one's pretty big. You could use a smaller bucket if you're not doing a lot of volume. And then you will need something to dye. So the yarn or fiber that you're dyeing. This is just white yarn from Harrisville Designs, which I use a lot for tapestry, or knit picks. This is some spinning fiber I'm going to paint. This is from bare yarn from Knit Picks, Wool of the Andes. Or you might even be dyeing some raw fleece. This is Icelandic fleece from Iceland. You probably also want to add some pH paper to your cart when you're getting your dyes. I use these to measure the pH of the water. It will be very acidic after you're done with the dyeing because you've added citric acid or vinegar, and you want to bring the pH up a little bit before you dump it down the drain. Hopefully that puts your mind at ease a little bit about what you need to do your own dyeing. It doesn't have to be complicated. You just need a few simple tools, many of which you can find in your recycle bin or old kitchen things that you wanted to replace anyway. I have an online class where I teach how to do this whole dyeing procedure with acid wool dyes. It will teach you to use these very simple procedures in a reliable way, so you can replicate what you're doing and make all kinds of beautiful yarn. I love it because I can make any color I want, including colors in gradations or colors that go from like one hue to another. Like I can make an ombre that goes from yellow to red. Say I had a knitting project and I wanted a shawl that had a change like that. I could do that with this dye process. The course is called Dyeing with Acid Wool Dye. You can find it at my website, tapestryweaving.com, or link directly to it below this video. I'll have you making your own colors fairly quickly, and the advantage of the online class is that you can ask questions anytime you want, and you can use the class as long as you want to. I can't wait to see what you make. I'll see you online.